And now we would like to move to our panel discussion titled Information is Key, AI and Data in Conflict Zones and Opportunities for Society, Policy Making and Business. In essence, we'll be talking about how data and AI tools can make a difference on the ground in conflict or crisis situations, and how that information revolution can be harnessed by policymakers, humanitarian organizations, and even businesses for the greater good. We have a stellar panel of experts, each coming from a different angle of the issue. I'm glad that Branka Panic is joining our panel discussion again, and we have the opportunity to follow up on some of your projects you already mentioned and we discussed in their keynote. Our second panelist is Andreas Papp, who began his humanitarian career at Doctors Without Borders. Pardon my French. Andreas spent years coordinating emergency aid projects in over a dozen countries. He then became the program director here in Austria. After that, he led emergency response at SOS Children's Village International, helping set up relief programs in 28 countries around the globe. Since then, Andreas hasn't slowed down, but founded his own consultancy and also founded PeaceEye, a venture that develops cutting-edge technology solutions to better analyze and respond to security challenges. With this blend of on-the-ground humanitarian grit and tech-driven innovation, Andreas will help us understand how data and AI can literally save lives in conflict zones. Last but not least, we have Nathan Coyle on our panel, a true champion of using information to build peace. Originally from Britain, you can't deny that, Nathan.
Don't hate me for it.
We won't. He's Senior Peace Tech Advisor at the Austrian Institute of Technology, where he leads the Peace Tech Alliance, Austria's first human-centric peace tech platform, and also heads peace tech initiatives at the Austrian Center for Peace. Nathan has worked with governments around the world to strengthen digital outreach. He's the author of Open Data for Everybody, Using Open Data for Social Good, and is also a TED speaker and a contributor to The Guardian and other outlets. You were named Thought Leader of the Year at the UK Innovation Award 2024, and you believe that making data more accessible and usable can empower communities and help prevent conflict. Thank you all for attending our panel today. We have roughly an hour for discussion, and I have a series of questions for each of you, but please feel free to jump in as soon as you have something to add. Now, Nathan, my first question goes to you. You've been, as mentioned, a vocal proponent of open data and civic technology. To set the stage, in the context of today's topics on peace building and conflict prevention, what are, in your view, the main developments that are going to impact that field, and what opportunities and challenges do you foresee in this sector?
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for that eloquent intro as well. I think that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. So I guess I'm going to be a little bit negative, and I'll try and be a bit more positive. I do think with AI, especially, I am still critical and still to see kind of the outcomes of it myself personally. Essentially, it's just a bunch of fancy algorithms that speak to each other and then make a decision. I do see the positives in AI, so I'll start with the positives and I'll go and bring everyone down and make it miserable. So with AI for education, for example, there's a lot of power there. It helps trainers and educators to really improve their work and where they're doing things well and where they're doing things bad at the same time. So I'm working on a project with the European Union called Augmenta, which is looking at how we can use AI for pedagogical reasons. But one of the questions I really want to have across the project, because we have many, many, many different stakeholders across Europe, we want to have a conversation about policy. Because one of the things in the European Union, as Claudia said before, is that a lot of them are kind of not based on more regulation and not substance. And I do think with the AI Act that the European Union recently put out there, they just thought that was going to be another GDPR, where different countries around the world will look at GDPR and see it as a really good framework in order for data governance, and something that can bring a lot to their country. And then I know the different countries are looking at GDPR, and then they use it themselves. Then we go into these federated data spaces. I'm not even going to go there another time. So I think they thought that, and when they didn't really look at the lay of the land, and especially now when I work within peace building and security across the European Union, and we're talking about AI for peace building, this is where I get negative. Because I think we are a long way from AI for peace building. Because if you look at the data, for example, I mean, I'm a data guy. You know, my lifeblood is data. I love data. Data feeds everything. But if you look at the data for AI for peace building, where like is it 90% of data sets that train AI are from Europe and North America, with 4% from Africa, and I'm just using Africa as an example here. And then if you look at the last sample from the Global Conflict Dialogue in 2024, 43% of conflicts came from Africa. So there's a big disparity of the global south and the global north. And, you know, we're only coming from this point of view there where like, we're trying to tell people how to do their job. That's not human-centric. And if you're having a conversation about what human-centric is, you need to put the people at the center of that argument and the center of those designs. Now, global south, human-centricness. There are, you know, so many different social cultures, languages, social norms. South Sudan, for example, and I won't talk about it too much because I know my friend Andreas is far more advanced in that. And you have a look at these different disparities that happen. For example, in South Sudan, it's taboo to take a photo. And, you know, the photo is data, photo is how people collect things, and etc. So how do we find out those things? And the way to do that is to design it with those people in mind. We have different things coming across the horizon. Why this is really important and why getting data right in regards to building AI models is more important. Because again, we have like the rise of quantum. And quantum will be a thing in the future, and how this is going to really power AI to different ways. So it can go two ways. We can use it for peace building, but for the most part, it's going to be used for stupid things like video games, which I'm not against at all, because video games are fantastic. But I do think there's a real conversation about how we can use AI with peace building, because yes, it's really good for physical training. At the Austrian Centre for Peace, we run 2 different projects around mission preparedness with my colleague Astrid. It was a really interesting conversation on how we can use AI for dialogue within those VR, MR settings, so we can learn from that and how we can put that forward. But then you always have the other side where, especially with video games, and how they can make videos more realistic. And there's a game called No Man's Sky, and if you've ever heard of it, but it's billions and billions of different planets. And they want to bring sentience to AI models and NPCs in these kind of games, which is either going to turn us all into, really teach us the meaning of empathy, or turn us into complete psychopaths. Probably the latter. So there's a lot of conversations that we need to have going forward, really. And I think in regards to this human-centricness and you know, I'm learning more about the Austrian ways of digital humanism and how we can incorporate those into AI policy before we actually go forward and build those for AI. So there's loads of potential with far more clever people like Branka that can put that into practice. But I do think more kind of outreach needs to happen, and money going towards the global south, because unfortunately the global south isn't sexy. And governments will say the right things, but they won't invest in it. They won't invest in projects that really improve the global south when it comes to data and all that kind of stuff. And especially now with the rise of quantum, it's going to be more, where's the money going to go? So I would say that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Andreas, my next question goes to you. You spent years on the front lines of humanitarian work, and you've seen firsthand how crucial and timely and reliable information is in crisis situation. From your practical view, where do you see the current state of AI and data technologies for crisis response? What can they realistically do today that wasn't possible just a few years ago? And from your experience, what are some best practices and success stories where AI truly made a difference on the ground?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I need to look back a bit in time. The year of 2008, when I was introduced the first time to satellite images, to high-resolution satellite images by a colleague who is also here, Professor Blaschke, from the Department of Geoinformatics at the University of Salzburg again. And coming back from 7 months from Darfur, where the genocide happened, I valued very quickly how important this information would have been having it beforehand. And that was the start of a collaboration of Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, and the university. And over the years we produced, and there we are with the examples of the application software to identify groundwater resources, 60, 80, 100 meters deep. And that's important when you have 20,000 people arriving within 1 week at a specific place in the bush in Africa, somewhere in the country. And you need to provide 5 liters of water per day. That's the minimum. Agricultural land use is such a thing. Accessibility during rainy seasons. You know that there is a place of 500 people and they have nothing and they die, and you need to get access to them. Where are the roads leading to them? And AI has brought in that we are able to analyze far more data in terms of volume. So different data sets that were difficult before to analyze. Now it's sometimes a question of a few seconds. And my approach then, after my 15 years with NGOs in the field, was, as I was also starting into the lockdown, my personal consultancy, and I put down the concept for PeaceEye, where we apply peace tech, where we combine these satellite data with information from the ground. And that was the information that I had from my local peers. I mean, you don't nothing when you come as a Khawaja into an African context where you have never been, so you have your local colleagues who explain to you what this means, what that is. And this human intelligence plus open source intelligence, so the data of media out there, plus social media analysis. I mean, you can analyze, people are discussing a topic on Telegram somewhere in the world, and you can do sentiment analysis, and you know what they're talking about. Not in detail and who, but you know if it's violent or not, for example. And the combination of all that together gives a pretty much interesting overview of what's going on the ground. So that is important for NGOs, for sure, if they work in frontline or in a very complex emergency. But there are also other stakeholders, and that's why I also want to mention international organizations, but also the industry. We have the industry also there, last but not least, because of minerals and raw materials, which are very often explored in volatile contexts. So there's a whole lot of interest on these analyses, which, due to AI, are helping us a lot to understand much better where we are and what to do.
Thank you. Very interesting perspective from the field. Branka, you mentioned it at the beginning of your keynote. When you look at the current situation in international affairs, conflicts are increasing, unfortunately, not just in quantity, but also in quality, as the nature of conflicts themselves is changing. What is your approach to addressing this trend, and what improvements can technology and AI offer against the background of these recent developments?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. I'll refer to that one and also try maybe to connect a couple of points from Andreas and Nathan. First, the importance, which is quite connected to the fact that conflicts are also changing, and that we need to understand in which way they're changing, which is related to the data. And maybe to Nathan to try to, I think I woke up on the right leg this morning, so I'll try to make the glass half full, just to recognize some of the successes that have been achieved in the field in the last decade, recognizing exactly what Nathan was talking about as challenges. For example, the lack of data and data sets for the global south, or especially for the conflict areas. In humanitarian settings, as Andreas was mentioning, a huge recognition of this gap has been recognized, and then a lot has been done. For example, one of the quite a motivational institutions for us in our work in peace building is actually a humanitarian data center based in The Hague, established by OCHA, recognizing the value and the need that we need to collect the data from the humanitarian settings. And on top of that, there was a recognition that this data, there is a huge value of positioning this data as an open source, and also positioning models themselves. So recognition that machine learning can help, but it can be even more helpful if we position some of the models that we developed as an open source for other countries or institutions, with this huge nuance of going back to Rania's point at the very beginning of recognizing the vulnerabilities and our responsibilities when we are dealing both with data and the models. So the entire institution developed the guidelines for using these data sets, so we ensure that even in situations when we want to do something good, we are actually not creating unintended harms. And this can happen, unfortunately. The risk is not only from malicious actors, it's actually from actors who are trying to do something good but are creating unintended consequences. And these organizations set a really model for others to work on in deciding on certain levels of access as well, that not everybody can have an access to all of the data sets, not everybody can have an access to models. There are trusted actors as well and trusted parties, so we ensure that we are not creating additional harms to populations that we are trying to help, right, in fragile settings or vulnerable populations. So this is a sort of a quick overview in what has been done in the humanitarian field. For the peace builders, we try to use this as a model, and then there is still a huge question why peace is such a complicated field, and peace building much different than humanitarian. Is that we still don't exactly understand what are all of the data sets that are showing the peacefulness of our societies, right? You heard in my introduction all of these models and organizations that are collecting the data on conflict, on violence, on civilian deaths or military casualties and so on. We don't actually know what else goes into the peace. And this is the part that I'm really curious about and interested. Can we use some of the potentials of these technologies in similar way how we measure or try to predict the conflict or crisis settings to see what makes our societies peaceful, and to maybe but together with monitoring the hate speech, we also monitor the peace speech and understand what are these narratives that make our societies more peaceful or make them sustain peace. So those are the 2 points. And the third one that I wanted to add, and maybe have a conversation with Andreas as well, around these comparisons between humanitarian and the peace building or crisis settings when you talk about conflicts, just so you to understand how much more complicated the conflicts are when we talk about anticipatory action and some of these models. Most of the successes in these technologies were actually in predicting the probability of natural disasters happening. And this is partially the part of the story of the humanitarian settings. The other part is crisis and conflict. So anticipatory action with crisis is much more complex, and that's why we were struggling not only to build these tools, but to decide what is the action that is coming out of this. So try to understand a natural disaster setting when the hurricane is coming or floods, or we can predict these events happening. We cannot do a lot to change them. Maybe we can build resilience of societies, probably like building better houses and using better materials, but the natural disaster is coming. That's it, right? When we talk about conflicts and crisis, we build all of these tools and try to anticipate the crisis with the intention to actually do something about it, right? Not necessarily only provide the humanitarian relief, but maybe even advise some of the governments or some of the actors of how we can prevent the casualties and conflicts and violence happening. And this is this complicated part, because what we've done so far is building the tools without the counting of our policies going into action, right? These tools are not being developed in a vacuum. So when we advise, for example, Austrian government to do something about it, this policy action is going to change the outcome of the government, right? This is going to change the future training of the models themselves, and we are not counting on these factors currently, which makes this entire field so much more complicated than humanitarian action. So I'm going to stop here, and we can maybe unpack this challenge.
Okay, that's a very interesting point from a technical perspective. Andreas, would you first like to answer? And
you mentioned
South Sudan, something to that.
Or please.
You can talk about South Sudan because you're the expert, mate. So there's two things really. Like I don't want to be too negative on that. AI for peacebuilding is an incredible tool, but again, sometimes you can't argue with the facts. Like you can't argue with the data of how it's imposed and deployed. And I can only go on my experiences. I don't want to sit on panels like this just to look clever. I want to kind of share experiences of what in the field. So for one, from a European Union perspective, missions, different missions, right? And so when you go into, so I'm talking about more federated data space. I'm involved in a project called GaiaX, which is the European Union Data Sovereignty Project. And then, so we go into all these people in mission and say, no, you need to consider more data governance, blah, blah, blah. And they go, Nathan, I don't even know how to turn a computer on, let alone talking about different data strategies and how we can use AI for peace building and all this kind of stuff. So we have that kind of social culture in the field that we need to change, and people like you will do that because you're amazing and you talk out in really eloquent ways that people understand, because that's a real big problem within, especially the European Union and government. We overcomplicate crap. We make things more complicated than they are. Again, the language you use isn't human-centric. Sometimes it's just a narrative point of view. And again, with open data from myself, when I was working in writing government, policy for government, mostly it's a dialogue issue, it's a language issue, it's nothing complicated. So yes, we have these social cultures of emissions, but they can be addressed with people like yourself and language and money, more than policy. But where I see the real power of AI for me personally is in tech diplomacy, usually how memorandum of understandings or peace agreements are put together. They are big, complicated processes, but they usually start with something as simple as a workshop. And you have two different belligerent groups in a room, you ask them what they want, and then they go away and they put together their feedback, and then they give you data in order to put together a memorandum of understanding. AI is really powerful here, because AI kind of, even though it is biased, because unfortunately data is biased, it reflects society, it's racist, it's sexist, we can't change that unless we change society, so good luck. But especially in this context, if an API is trained right, it can be an unbiased model. If you're only giving it data and it's not using wider data, you can make unbiased AI models. So I think that's where the power really is, because regardless of your country, regardless of what diplomacy sector that you fit into, you're always going to be considered with suspicion from any country that you go to. Here, this is where I do think AI actually can really help. So I don't want to sound too negative when I first start, because we have to look at the real world. But also, there is so much power. And so I'm not I'm on board, basically. But yeah, just want to say that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would like to come back what Branka said about humanitarian aid and peace building. Where's the difference? And there is a huge difference, because humanitarian aid workers are operating in a hostile and difficult environment where there are at least two warring factions trying to kill each other. And you're only possible to work in such an environment if you have something with an added value for all of them, including the civil society, the people around them, not just the warring factions, who from time to time need war surgery when they hit each other. But you're only allowed to do there when you're neutral and impartial and independent. So you're there, you don't talk, you don't share this information, who are the good, who are the bad, and who are the real uglies. This is not for a humanitarian aid worker to, blur it out, because the next door, you get a knock on the door and you're the next in the row. So they have to keep silent. And that was my problem very often when in front of me, and I've heard it from my local colleagues, you hear the trucks with the soldiers singing when they go up to the front line. You hear the stories about that many technicals moved there, and you hear the tanks and everything. But we're not allowed to say that. So. And then when it comes to the peace, and this is exactly what I meant before when we talk about impact, how do we impact this peace process? It's not me, it's not us, it's not a diplomat who has not shown up there before any time who are able to impact the peace. It's the local communities, the local elders who do this job. There are a few academics in the capital, there are peace builders, peace activists, who, by the way, the people in Schleining do know very well when it comes to South Sudan and Sudan, but diplomats and military, and they do not celebrate their success very often because, it's often too sensitive also. And this information about too less food there, you have the hunger gap in the summer. And then one tribe has still water available because they have a river through their valley, let's say, and the other tribe has nothing. And then they say, good, my children are dying, give me some of your water or your food. And they say, we don't have enough, sorry, we can't give you. Then they come during the night, steal their cattle, whatever, 20 cows, it's a story that happened, sell it on the market for food. Then the other tribe kidnapped children to get the cows back, and the elders could not agree on a peace agreement. So from that moment on, these both tribes were clashing. And you know that before. You have the analysis about the agricultural land use, you know where the water is, you know the prices of the market, you know it's 3 times higher than normal, and you have 10,000 more people in the region. That is mega stress for the population, which results very often in these parts of the world into conflict. So as a humanitarian aid worker, I could not say, please come and do something. Now with PeaceEye, we have a tool, because we will share this information with everyone who wants to know or don't want to know it, because it's also about to advocate for these changes. The problem is, and I think you mentioned it, we know already a lot. The question is, who is willing to do something? Tigray. Anyone knew the 10,000s of people killed in Ethiopia last year? Sudan. 100,000 people have been killed in Darfur just the last year. No one knew. DRC, Kivus. We could continue with that list. So the one thing is to know about and leave it to the humanitarians and to some international organizations. Or what can we do about it? And there we need a whole of governance, a whole of nation approach. We need the knowledge of the NGOs. We need the muscles of the industry very often. And, some snowplug maybe from a ministry or from the diplomacy here and there to open doors. That is what we need. I stop here, otherwise I would give a cold lecture. Yeah.
Maybe thanks so much, Andreas. Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Just say thanks for sharing this story, which is often the situation in conflict areas. And again, going back to this tension in a way as well between humanitarians and the peace builders or any policymakers.
Yep.
And we see that especially now intensively with the data and data-driven tools, because it's not only about the action, what we do with the data signals that we are receiving or predictions, it's also about who is reacting on the signal. And this is where a lot of this tension is coming from. We recently had some collaboration with UNHCR, and you see that conversation around predicting the movements of populations in conflict areas, right? And how movements of migrants or refugees are important for humanitarian organizations because you want to be ready, right? You want to be ready to know when population is crossing the border, where it will be, how you prepare refugee aid, how you prepare relief, and so on. If you make that available, those predictions out there, you can imagine, I mean, some of the governments, their action on that will be closing the borders, right? Or different ways of protecting from what they consider as a threat. And this is a huge conversation now of how we make this, talking about the openness as well of data and models, by knowing which kind of action is going to come after that. We had a similar dilemma. I mentioned in the introduction this project on predicting the famine with the same, the project was also with the collaboration of the World Bank with UN OCHA and different humanitarian agencies to be able to prepare to respond to famines and actually not respond, prevent famines, providing the humanitarian aid on time. However, famines being used as a tool of war, these type of signals can be misused by malicious actors, by one of the warring parties to actually target that specific population in the crisis zone. So those are all really complicated factors that are coming on top of the conversation that we are having. And the last one, just to connect, Nathan, did I miss it now? No, you mentioned the biases. This is a super interesting conversation. And I think our experience was we had similar experiences with some of these tools. We actually used it as an opportunity for capacity building. So where we saw that some of these tools for hate speech monitoring are biased, and where data is actually lacking, going back to your point, when we started doing the training of hate speech models in some of the conflict zones, on the surface, you see so many open data sets out there. When you try to dig deeper what this data is about, you realize that this is a hate speech in, for example, the Sri Lanka project that I mentioned was hate speech in Bollywood movies, or hate speech in Hollywood, or you realize that this is not actually functional for what you are trying to do in real life, right? Real life conversations. So we used it as an opportunity to create our own data sets. And through that process, explain to people on the ground, those who are closest to the experience of hate speech in conflict zones, actually label the content and create new data sets to try to, I know it's so little in comparison to what we are lacking in the entire global south, but I do see it as a sort of little added value that we can hopefully scale out there and actually give voice or agency to people to decide on their own and create their own data sets in situations when they're missing.
If I could just go, fully yes. Yeah, I mean, that is how we're going to change it basically, and I do think there's a real space for journalism here as well, and freedom of expression. Like I did a talk at the OSCE the other week, and I was banging on about how open data, but the answer is to collect data, to train those data sets, to use them for AI and etc. And this is where we need to have more of a robust freedom of expression in countries, because they can populate a lot of data. And then obviously we can regurgitate AI to make sure and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot we can do. So, yeah, I completely agree. Fantastic.
Thank you. I would like to take the opportunity to ask the audience, what is your questions with which you would like to step in. We don't have a microphone available like after the lunch break, so yeah, I would, if you would please speak up, this would help a lot. Thank you very much.
Okay, can speak up. Thank you so much for interesting insights. I would have a question on building the narrative together with the media, the traditional ones, but also the social media, on preventing conflicts. It is quite difficult actually for media to be part of it when it is not a disaster, when it is the prevention of the conflict does not give the news. So how can we address this dilemma? I have a quite interesting example when Federica Mogherini was the High Representative and the Vice President of the Commission 10 years ago. There was the risk of a huge problem in Palestine at that time, in Palestine in general, both the West Bank and Gaza, because UNRWA was lacking funds to start the school in September. So they weren't having enough funds to start the school year. And the EU gave UNRWA 500 million euros to help them providing the salaries for the teachers and everything connected with starting the school year. Federica Mogherini asked the media at the press conference, please report on that. We have prevented it with a huge crisis because of kids staying out of school and especially teenagers with the violent derivatives that could come from that. And nobody reported on that. So how can we address that beyond this kind of very interesting settings with social media and traditional media?
Mm-hmm. Interesting question. Who would like to go first? Andreas?
I can say something to social media, because even though I don't have even one and never will, people on the ground are extensively using it. Extensively. That's the way of communicating from one village to the other, or from one camp. I mean, water, food, medicine, Wi-Fi. These are the questions that you get. Wi-Fi is even more often on the second or third. That's hugely important for the people, because that's their mean of communication. And you can intercept that and find out what they're talking about or what the sentiment is about. Again, without hacking, it's legal. It's not illegal what you do here. But you can also address a lot of things directly to these people and ask them to share what they want, what they think, what they need. And there we are at the impact, and about who is holding the reins in the hands. And it should be for sure the local communities. They should tell us what we should do. Not in the Zelinka-Gasse, a plan is written, and then 3 years later, when it's completely outdated and unnecessary, it's implemented. That's the fundamental change that we have to do. And as Nathan said, the money should go there. They should know how to use AI. They should know how to get the information and the data to them so it can create an impact for them. We know it anyway. What's in it for us? Okay, we can have smart discussions, but does that change anything for the people on the ground? No. So our job is also to increase the literacy of these people, to use the technology, to use the data for themselves, that they know the rainy season will set in here and then, and that's the right time to bring out the seeds, etc., etc., etc. For someone here, nice to know, we have a nice map where we understand the world a little bit better in that small part. But the real impact comes when the local people, and that's our job, to bring them on the level that they can use it, and they know how to use it in a positive way. You can use everything positive or negative. I mean, it's a dual use. For sure, you can use social media to bias people, to draw a wrong image, etc., etc. But the more democratically it's used, the more you prevent that. That's at least my opinion. Thanks.
Can I maybe just quickly add something? Because I really appreciate your question, because I think this is a make it or break it point for journalism, especially because of the generative media and generative content creation. And we had like sort of ups and downs with this. So I'm coming from, I grew up in a region that was authoritative. It basically had one media, right? One TV station that was just like creating their own story narratives throughout the war. For me, when I encountered the social media, it was really a sort of, and we saw that, I mean, across different regions with the Arabs, so-called Arab Spring, and in many other countries, kind of giving back the voice to populations whose voices were suffocated. So it was a sort of a new journalism being born, which had a downward curve with all of the misinformation, disinformation, creating fake news out there. And I completely agree with the voices that we need to listen from the ground. But those voices are so many times fooled with misinformation, disinformation. And now we see that, like, look, all of the conflicts are full with fake content. Like even using the fake imagery from other contents, like we've been doing mapping on generative AI throughout conflict zones. It's just incredibly harmful and worrying what we are witnessing today with the spread of this way of social media narratives, where I see, to go back to your point, I think we need the rebirth of trusted journalism there. And I kind of think the market, I'm hopeful, the market will create naturally this need, because we are so we are in a risk of completely losing trust in information ecosystem. You know this, I don't know exactly the quote now of Maria Ressa, the journalist from Philippines who got the Nobel Peace Prize, she's still talking, advocating for this for years. If we lose trust in our information, the title of our session today, and this information ecosystem, we lost everything. We lost democracy, we lost trust. It's very worrying, and this is, again, to go back to your point, I'm hopeful that this will bring back the need for a proper factual journalism, not maybe in the sense how you framed your question, because I think similar to humanitarian actors, journalists should, investigative journalism should be out there to provide the objective picture of the facts that are happening on the ground, not necessarily take sides, but just informing us what is actually happening out there in combination with voices of people who are going through the certain crisis or conflict. I think this is what needs to happen in the future. Otherwise, it will really be a challenging time for both democracies and non-democracies in the world, but for citizens, let's call it like that. Yeah.
Very brief. Data journalists always find a way. You know, and from especially like in authoritarian regimes, there's a library in Minecraft full of like banned documents and banned policies and all that kind of stuff that journalists have put there. So journalists will always find a way. I think it's ridiculous that we have to build a society where we have to defend facts, which we do now in the media, regardless of where you are in the world. I watch a lot of British news, unfortunately, and you know, that is always based on a narrative. And unless we change social cultures, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But there's things we can do at home within our organisations, within our ministries or whatever, to change social cultures. Especially now, there's plenty of tools out there now, journalistic tools which tells you what's left wing, right wing, blah blah blah. And maybe we need to just bring more fact-checking into the conversation, which is a really ridiculous thing to say, but there we go. So. Okay.
We have another question in the front.
It's almost three of you, because I want to start with you, because I follow UK policy. Carolyn Cutler, for example, she talking about investigative journalism. Who is paying for that? I think we need also as a civil society become more educated where our news sources are, but also pay for it. So I think this is something that is my own agency, but also should be on the policy, on a government policy to educate people.
I agree.
Don't go to Facebook where Jenny spreads her opinion. So number one. But also we are in the 24 news cycle, and I'm coming back what you said, because I'm following news all the time, but some of the conflict areas fall off my radar screen because I cannot keep up. So this is another one. It's so you're distracted, you're not even aware of the appalling crisis. But I really like what you said in terms of solution, work with the local community, give them tools in terms of AI literacy, or even, create their own agents so they can communicate, they can create their own AI agents for local use. And I think, who is following up on that? Not the policymakers. It takes 2 years to have another policy. So I think I really like, because this is a very practically decentralized ideas to give agency back to people in the crisis.
Thank you very much. We have another question in the back.
Thank you so much. Nathan, to paraphrase, I'm not sure if I understood you correctly. I understood like the data about Africa is hugely underrepresented, even though there's a lot of conflict there.
Absolutely.
So how do we change that? Is that a question of resources, or why is there again this problem that where something happens is not where actually the solution is?
Money. Unfortunately, like I wish I could give you some philosophical answer. Again, we come back to the thing now when it comes to especially AI models and data. Data is sexy again, which I'm very happy about. We always have the big talk about new things coming in and whatever, but then we have real problems as a global society. If everything is based on data now, everything from AI to how our journalistic system works, how policy is written, if that's completely unrepresentative of one community, then I think it's pointless. I always say, like, I work in peace tech. Like, I run something here in Austria called the Peace Tech Alliance with a bunch of different academic and partners across the country. And I always go, well, peace tech's nice. It sounds nice. But basically, it's just a buzzword. It doesn't really mean anything to me. But I do think it's a good thing that anything that shines a light on using technology for peace is a good thing. So that's what I'm saying. But what I'm trying to do with that is kind of shine the light, especially on the Austrians, because for some reason they give me a bit of power to go mental, which I'm going to do. And I want to kind of use that platform to try and change these disparities, and then try and get the Austrians to maybe spend a bit of money down there, and the EU as well. But I do think it comes down to investment, and we need to think about the social value of investment that, like, especially that governments do, or the EU, and I don't really think we think about that too much, because again, I think we think about regulation and not substance. I want to come back to that. So we need to kind of change that thinking. I think, and also there needs to be more, I don't want to blow smoke up my own arse, but there need more voices like me, because, I come from a poor background. I know what it's like to be poor. I know what it's like to come from a family that struggles. Most of the people around me don't. Maybe that's just because it's Vienna, it's a bit posh. But it is posh. And I think it isn't just about money, it's about changing narratives, it's about having different people at the table, it's about bringing journalists forward, like you say, and I do think you need to be people who are going to go into those kind of circles and kick some bins over and kick some doors open, and then kind of change the way that people think. And if we don't do that, then it would just stay the same, and we go around in these circles, and hopefully that won't happen.
Okay. You wanted to add something?
No, maybe this is also what I meant before when I said whole of nation, whole of governance approach. As you said, we need all the different actors and stakeholders around the table, which we had or still have this system, the 3C annual conference in Schleining for 3 days, where the ministries come together, the NGOs come together. And I don't want to start bashing what did happen in the past, but more to look into the future. We need exactly that, because we have a vital interest of the foreign trade industry with all the products, all the services that are needed in the global south. And it's not just the NGOs who can lift that huge weight of dealing with the situation and climate change and everything, and this new, you have shown it so well, the increase of the atypical conflicts and whatsoever. And we have not counted in also the large impact on human suffering for the displacement due to these wars and conflicts and the migration towards Europe. I mean, that's the white elephant in the room, let's say, you know. So it's all interlinked. And what we need is not just the NGOs, we need the industry, we need the policymakers, we need the journalists and science. Don't forget science. They show us what we can do with these technologies. I'm not a software engineer, but when I was at the university, I was like, wow, I want that. And I told them about our problems, and 2 months later, they called me and said, Andreas, come, I think we have a solution. That's it. And then I got the radius on a map. Here, drill down 60 meters, radius of 30 meters, and you will find 2 million of water. I mean, that's simple-minded humanitarian aid information that you need, how to drill a borehole or where to drill it. So that's my message, and I'm also thankful for IUFE to picking this important topic up and have a discussion. But what we need is in 6 months or in 1 year, not another discussion to tell us more or less the same. What we need is a nationwide initiative. And therefore, we need also a political willingness, which I miss in Austria for a long time. Or first it was West Africa, because it was more interesting for the benefit of the industry. Then it was East Africa, where a lot of people saw more opportunities. Then some people said, okay, that's far too dangerous for the Austrians. Why they do it, you don't know. It took another 5 years to find out where is now our focus when it comes to the Global South, and we still don't know. And I think that's something what we can't solve from the civil society, where we need the politicians, but where maybe the politicians would also need to hear a bit more what the NGOs have to say. And then if we're all around the table and agree on something, then we can do things.
Any other comments? We have a very last question over there.
Actually, not so much a question. It's something I want to say about the media. I come from the media, and I've experienced over the last 20 years, let's say, a tremendous decline in quality of reporting. I will tell you how it works. You have a press conference in some famous cafe, 20 journalists there, all come to get breakfast. They eat like that, and at the end they say, without taking any notes, they say, where's the printout, your press release? And that's what's in the next day in the paper, which is always one-sided and never researched by the journalists. Then you read the articles, the comments that are very often linguistically speaking primitive, you know? Jahresversammlung trifft sich einmal im Jahr, sich zu versammeln, über das letzte Jahr zu sprechen. That's what it says in the High German, you know. Never mind whether it's Frankfurt Allgemeine or Süddeutsche or Presse or Standard or whatever. So I'm saying what it actually needs in order to bring your wishes over is profound public relations. You must create an interest in the journalists who themselves will change it into creating an interest in the public. But today, when you go with your problem of Darfur or whatever to I don't know, I don't know name, but if you ask him and say, oh, please do something about it, he will say, my readers aren't interested.
Thank you very much. The point is taken. The point is taken, and I will take the privilege as the moderator today to ask the last question to our experts.
There is another.
Sorry, another question. A very last question.
Question or something to think about. I don't know. They're coming from humanitarian aid and development corporation myself as well. It's about like nothing. You're talking about data. Yeah, great. But who's gonna think of people and person groups that are not kept by data? You know, like indigenous people, yeah? Or historical things only given words to mouth.
Yeah.
Elders,
It's not written down. So I think we also should have a focus, but kept it in mind.
You're completely right, and again, data, whatever, digital, blah blah blah, it's just a means to evidence something, basically. And what is the evidence? I come from a community development background. Like I'm now working kind of tech policy, but I'm a community developer. That's right. So basically, anytime I run an event or a workshop or blah blah blah, we try to collect data from it. So I completely agree. Like, the data isn't the important thing, it's the actual substance of the person who is collecting that. But I do think that we need to put some compliance in place to make sure that those things are. So, but yeah, I agree, data is just a means of evidencing something, and without that, yeah, we're on the same page completely.
Can I just quickly add a bit of a positive note on that? Because I think the field recognized this, at least the communities that were harmed by the fact that they were actually not presented in or represented in some of the data sets. Where you mentioned indigenous communities, indigenous AI is one of the biggest movements now, or AI, Africa AI languages, recognizing that so many things that have been trained today have been trained on most spoken languages, like English or French, or not to talk about China and Chinese. So the communities themselves took back the agency, going back to the agency of local populations, and said, wait, we want to actually be represented, and we want to do the mapping by ourselves. And those two movements are one of the most active one now in the field. There is an opposite, a risk side now for me to take ahead a bit of, be careful about risks as well, because in some situations, some populations are overrepresented in data sets. So we see that a lot when we talk about peace and security and crime, for example. When we are mapping the crime, we somehow, and maybe not intentionally, but going back to bias, because of our bias of looking into specific communities only, we are over-mapping representation of certain communities and their involvement in crime data. So, yeah, please do. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. A great point to end on.
That's where you should end.
Excellent.
It.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And we have a new host for next year's conference. Well done.
What's your day rate?
I would like to end with a short question to each of you, with a question for a word wrap answer. Imagine it's 2035, 10 years from now. In an ideal world, how will AI and data have changed humanitarian work, peace building, and development? Who would like to start?
We live in a utopian society, and Wolverhampton Wanderers has won the Premier League. It's good if...
Talking about peace.
It's peace for me. Bonjour. Again, I think like we're all kind of collaborative, working together a bit better. We have more kind of regulations that make it easier to share data and fairer data, and there's a lot more space for community journalism in countries where it's almost impossible for them to report from. So how can we kind of, sometimes as a data activist, how can we go around the back end and support those?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for me it's really simple, and it might be my utopia, but really my goal, like 0 wars, no people dying in violent conflicts, accepting conflicts as useful, but never allowing them to become violent and take people's lives.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas.
Yeah, I'm
on you.
maybe not that positive, but I'm also opportunistic, because I think of a future where I think for a couple of years, and look at the state of the world now. I mean, we're in the shit. Yeah, we're governed by the different countries who rule and their leaders. It's difficult, and I think it will get a little bit worse before it's getting better. I always believe after a dark period, a lighter period will come. And I hope that people, and especially the young generation, will say, okay, enough is enough. And you know, they're all men in power. I hope that women will be in the future in power, and there will be less wars and less violence, and hopefully for the better of everyone.
This is, I think, a positive note to end. Thank you very much. I want to sincerely thank the three panelists, Branka Panic, Andreas Papp, and Nathan Coyle. Please give them a big round of applause.